There are a lot more books in my basement that I haven't shown you on my tours. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another bibliophile reads. My name is Greg, and I am continuing my tour of my basement library. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another bibliophile reads. My name is Greg, and I'm continuing my tour of the basement library. I still have my mass market paperbacks to finish. Today I'll be doing H through J. There will be literary fiction, genre fiction, and nonfiction. Arthur Hailey, Airport, a 60s novel. This was really rather intensely amusing. Arthur Hailey is one of those authors who is fading into obscurity nowadays. Hotel by Arthur Hailey. The Money Changers by Arthur Hailey. This one is from the 70s, and it has a step-back cover. I always love step-back covers. Slime by John Halkin, an 80s killer animal novel. These horror stories are rather ridiculous. John Halkin is nowhere nearly as talented as James Herbert. This features killer jellyfish. Keeper of the Children by William Halahan, a 70s or maybe an 80s horror novel that features a killer teddy bear with an axe, just like you see on the cover. It was pretty darn good. The Ambushers by Donald Hamilton, a Matt Helm adventure. These are men's adventure stories. This one was from 1965, and it just has those really wonderful old pulpy covers. The Betrayers by Donald Hamilton, another Matt Helm novel. The Intimidators by Donald Hamilton. I've picked up these Matt Helm books in thrift stores for like $1. I have not read any of them yet, but I need to get around to them. Dashiell Hammett, The Maltese Falcon. This might be the pinnacle of hard-boiled detective novels. The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett, another great mystery novel from the 30s. The Big Knockover by Dashiell Hammett. This is a collection of his short stories. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the great pulpy covers for Dashiell Hammett, but I'm on the lookout for them. Mountains of the Moon by William Harrison, originally entitled Burton and Speke. This is historical fiction about Richard Burton and Speke, who discovered the source of the Nile. Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, his last novel, perhaps his best novel. I think this is one of my favorite books of all time. Harry Harrison, Death World 2, the sequel to Death World. Death World 3 by Harry Harrison, another sequel to Death World. I have only read Death World. I first read it in high school. Then I read it about 2 other times. It is great old science fiction. Unfortunately, I don't have a paperback for that book. I'm on the lookout for it. Assassins from Tomorrow by Peter Heath, a science fiction novel from 1967. It contains a conspiracy theory about the assassination of JFK. I have not read it, but how can you resist a conspiracy novel of JFK from 1967 that might include time travel. Children of the Black Sabbath by Anne Hebert, translated from the French. This is a Canadian novel about a nunnery and devil worship. It is a very odd book. I don't know if it's a good book, but it's an odd book that was somewhat entertaining. It's also, unfortunately, rather hard to find nowadays in English translation. Ritual by William Heferin, a novel from 1988. It is about a police detective in New York City looking for a murderer who uses an obsidian knife, commonly used by the Aztecs. This also ends with a very rare and unusual trope in detective fiction. Time Enough for Love by Robert A. Heinlein, one of his thick science fiction novels. Farnham's Freehold by Robert A. Heinlein. This contains what would be now considered some disturbing passages of inappropriate adult relationships and some really rather blatant racism. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, a classic World War II novel that's really rather funny in some parts. A Soldier of the Great War by Mark Halperin, an historical novel about World War I, published in 1991. It contains an odd passage where a young man is talking to an older man about how often women get pregnant when you have a sexual relationship with them. The old man says, if you're not married, once. If you're married, at least 100 times. The Green Hills of Africa by Ernest Hemingway. Some of his nonfiction travel writings about hunting. To Have and Have Not by Ernest Hemingway, one of his disappointing novels. A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway, a collection of essays of sorts about his time in Paris. The Godmakers by Frank Herbert, a science fiction novel from 1971. The Green Brain by Frank Herbert, a science fiction novel from the 1960s. The Dorsai Experiment by Frank Herbert, a science fiction novel from the 70s. The Santorgia Experiment by Frank Herbert, a science fiction novel from the 60s. The Rats by James Herbert, published in 1974, perhaps the greatest killer animal novel of all time. The Lair by James Herbert, a sequel to The Rats. Dominion by James Herbert, a third sequel to The Rats. Fluke by James Herbert. I'm not sure if this is a horror novel, a science fiction novel, or a fantasy novel. If I'm not mistaken, it's about a man's identity being switched with a dog. The Fog by James Herbert, a horror novel from 1975. According to Michael K. Vaughan, this contains an unforgettable scene about a mad cow. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the unforgettable scene, so I have to reread it. The Spear by James Herbert. I believe this is more of a thriller than a horror novel. I originally read it in the 1980s. Survivor by James Herbert, a horror novel. Hiroshima by John Hershey, a non-fiction account of the people who survived the bombing of Hiroshima, one of the great classics of American journalism. The Wall by John Hershey, originally published in 1950. This is a fictionalized account of the Jewish ghettos in Warsaw and the Jews who rise up against the German captors. The Swarm by Arthur Herzog, originally published in 1974. Are you old enough to remember the scare, the fear that the Africanized killer bees were going to invade the United States? Well, this is a fictional account of what would happen if the killer bees ever really did invade the United States. Beneath the Wheel by Herman Hesse, translated from the German. Herman Hesse won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 40s. He was an intensely philosophical and intellectual writer. He used to be a big deal when I was growing up, and he was even a bigger deal in a generation before me, because his novels are always kind of profound. This one is a coming of age story. Damien, Hesse's perhaps most famous coming of age story. Magister Ludi, also known as the Glass Bead Game, this is one of his most famous novels that I really have to read one day. Narcissus and Goldmund, a story of two men in the Middle Ages. One is drawn to religion, the other artistic endeavors. Rose Hild, published in 1914. Apparently, this is semi-autobiographical, and it features a painter. Steppenwolf, perhaps his most famous and challenging book. I have read it twice. I need to reread it again. Stories of 5 Decades. I have never actually read any of Herman Hesse's short stories, but it was available at a used bookstore dirt cheap, so I had to pick it up. Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl, a non-fiction account of a modern explorer building a primitive raft and crossing the Pacific. The Copper Dun Stud by Ray Hogan, a Western from the 80s. Road to Hell by Gerard Horner. This is a horror novel from 1999. It features an assassin who may be part demon. The Beast That Was Max by Gerard Horner, a sequel to Road to Hell. Geoffrey Household, Rogue Male, originally published in 1954. It is about an assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler. Ape and Esses by Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley is more famously known for Brave New World. This book was published in 1948, and it is described as a successor to that novel. Eyeless in Gaza by Aldous Huxley. This was published in 1936, and it's about a man's search for identity in a tumultuous world. The Last Days of Sodom and Gomorrah by Paul Ilton, originally published in 1957. This is an historical novel about ancient Egypt. That woman only has head tassels covering her breasts. The Dead Girls by Jorge Ibargüengoitia. I am absolutely positive I have butchered the pronunciation of his last name. This is a crime novel translated from the Spanish. He is a Mexican author. Two Crimes by Jorge I. Another crime novel translated from the Spanish. This Symbiotic Fascination by Charlie Jacob, a horror novel from 2002. If I am not mistaken, this features an overweight vampire. Hangsman by Shirley Jackson, originally published in the 50s. Shirley Jackson is more famously known for her great short story, The Lottery. This is one of Shirley Jackson's novels. The Sundial by Shirley Jackson, another novel from the 50s. John Jakes, the Bastard, the first in the Kent family chronicles. This is a series of historical novels beginning with the American Revolution. It was pretty good. The Rebels, the second in the Kent family chronicles. And this progresses just a little bit further in history. The Seekers, the third in the Kent family chronicle. The Furies, the fourth in the Kent family chronicles. The Titans, the fifth in the Kent family chronicles. The Warriors, the sixth in the Kent family chronicles. As you can see, there's quite a lot of the Kent family chronicles. I think I'm actually missing another book. I, Barbarian by John Jakes, an historical novel that he wrote in the 50s. I believe this is set in the time of Genghis Khan. Comanche Vengeance by Richard Jessup, a Western from 1957. The Devil's Kiss by William W. Johnstone from 1980. This is a horror novel featuring devil worship. Johnstone is mostly known for writing Westerns. The Devil's Touch, a sequel to The Devil's Kiss. The Devil's Heart, the third sequel to the Devil's Kiss series. The Devil's Cat, the fifth in the Devil's Kiss series. Rockabilly Hell by William W. Johnstone, originally published in 1995. This is a horror novel that features rock and roll somehow. Let's Go Play at the Adams by Mendel Johnson, a horror novel from 1977. This features kids, teenagers, capturing their babysitter and torturing her. It is a quite gruesome dive into the depths of troubled psychology. Colossus by D.E. Jones, a science fiction novel from the 60s that thinks about what would happen if a computer became intelligent. The Fall of the Colossus, a sequel to Colossus. Colossus and the Crab, the third book in the Colossus trilogy. Fear of Flying by Erica Jong from 1973. This is a rather notorious novel that features a woman exploring her sexuality. And those are my mass market paperbacks, H through J. Thank you for watching and keep on reading.